My name's Wayne. I'm the founder of a company called Tyrion. And I start off all of my presentations with a slide of blockchain Jesus. The reason I do that is that since I got started in the industry, we launched our product in 2015, there's been all these promises about what you can do with blockchain. And if you think about it, here we are in 2019, we're in a situation where a lot of those promises have been unfulfilled. And you gotta think about why. Back in the early days of Bitcoin, before Ethereum, it was all about censorship-resistant value transfer and storage. And then there were all these other use cases for blockchain technology that sort of came along. It was going to be used for everything. It was going to be supply chain and healthcare and all these other things. And it just hasn't come to fruition. And I think one of the reasons for that is because people didn't really understand what the technology was for, and they overpromised, and they tried to create new software platforms, entire new software platforms that required people to rethink how they do things. And so the idea of putting everything on a blockchain is not really possible for scalability reasons. Bitcoin can do about, in practical purpose, about 5 transactions per second. Ethereum can do about 12, 15 transactions per second. Private Ethereum, things like Cosmos, Tendermint, they can get into the hundreds of transactions per second. But there is no one substrate that really can provide a global computing platform for all the world's information and all the world's data. So we are constrained by what the technology can actually offer. But what you can do at scale is you can link data to a blockchain. So we created a technology called Chainpoint that allows you to take a hash of some data and cryptographically link it to a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain and get back a timestamp proof. And it turns out that this is actually really valuable. When we first launched the original Tyrion application back in 2015, we launched it. I won the Consensus Hackathon. Consensus is an event in New York. They host a hackathon every year. And we built an insurance claims processing system that created an audit trail on Bitcoin for the entire claims process from start to finish. That way anybody, a regulator, an auditor, any party could evaluate that data and be able to prove the integrity and the timestamp of the information. And most importantly, we were able to create a technology that worked in the real world that did this at scale for millions or billions of records. So today, what started back then has evolved into what's known as the Chainpoint Network. And right now, there are about 5,800 Chainpoint nodes running around the world. And our vision is for building a global proof engine. We want to be able to create a part of the internet that you can use to verify the integrity and timestamp of information that's not controlled by any single company, and that the underlying medium through which it is linked to as a trust anchor is not controlled by any one organization. It's very resilient. It's not going to change. It's not going to go away. And so the way that we accomplish that is by cryptographically linking data to a Bitcoin transaction. We created an open standard initially back in 2015 called Chainpoint. Some of you guys may know Sean Wilkinson. He's the founder of Storage. He had built something called HashServe, and I had been working with a company called Factum. And we kind of put some of our ideas together to come up with a common proof format for being able to link a hash of some data to a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that was really sort of one of the genesis of this technology. At the time, I had been making marketing automation software, and we had a problem, and I was trying to solve my own problem. We made software that did things like email marketing, web analytics, lead capture, a business rules engine in the background to be able to automate activities. And the way that we made money was on a performance basis. That meant that we made money based on a number of leads that we were able to generate for a customer above a baseline, or a percentage of growth of online sales. And we had multi-year relationships with our customers, fairly large companies. Even though we liked our customers mostly, and they liked us for the most part, there was always tension between us, because the invoices that we would submit to them always were backed by some data. And they were always suspect that we were manipulating the data. How could we prove that we weren't changing the data or the order these things came in? And at the time, there were these solutions called proof of existence on top of Bitcoin, where you would take a hash of some data. And for those of you who don't know what a hash is, you can take any arbitrary piece of data in the world, a screen capture of this, a text file, an entire database, a DVD that contains an entire copy of Lord of the Rings. And you can analyze it cryptographically and create a smaller number. In the case of Bitcoin, it's a 32-byte SHA-256 hash. That's the most common format that is used. And that hash is a digital fingerprint. It is a representation, a cryptographic summary of that piece of information. And if you change anything about that source and you were to rehash it, it get a completely different number. So this is a way that we use to check the integrity of data in blockchain systems. And so the idea that we had was, well, what if we could do that for all of the information that flows through our system? It's a piece of software called SmartNet. This was hundreds of thousands, millions of transactions. And so we created a way to be able to link a hash of some data, many, many hashes, to a transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. And before I go any further, how many people in the room are software developers? Okay, so a few people. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. So what we're doing is we're taking that digest of information and we're using what's called a Merkle tree to be able to aggregate those together into a single hash that gets published to a Bitcoin transaction in op return. And then we watch that transaction for 6 confirmations, and we are able to extract a Merkle inclusion proof that goes from the Bitcoin block header all the way back up to the hash that you had originally submitted. So for the software developers, they probably understand most of what I said. For everybody else in the room, let me go back. For everybody else in the room, you can kind of see here in the chart up on the screen that there is a set of hashes on the left-hand side, and there's a tree-like structure that is used to aggregate those hashes, and you take pairs of them and you hash them together and generate a new number. And that is able to be embedded into a Bitcoin transaction, and the output of that is what's called a Chainpoint proof, which is either a binary or a JSON file that gives you a path cryptographically. You can walk through it. So before I get into I'll talk a little bit more about the tech later, but let me tell you how people are actually using this, because this is a good point of pride for us as an organization, is that people are using this technology and have been in the real world in production. So I'd like to talk about some of the use cases here. Liaison is a company that they're involved in the healthcare space, and they're using Chainpoint to be able to prove the integrity of the data in their systems. Dell has a piece of software called Boomi. It was a company that they acquired. The company, for those of you familiar with If This Then That or Zapier, Boomi is Dell's product in that particular space. It allows you to visually create workflows to connect data between different systems. So if you have, let's say you've got a website and you have a contact form on your website. When somebody submits data through that contact form, it would be able to be collected. Maybe the email address goes into MailChimp. Maybe the entire record goes into Salesforce.com. Maybe a notification goes to somebody else using some sort of messaging system. Boomi is the glue that can be used to pull all of that together. And Chainpoint, they integrated Chainpoint as part of that platform. So if you want to be able to create a timestamp proof of whatever information that you had pushed through the system, you would be able to do that very easily using a visual interface. Ultimus, they are a European company. They've got customers all over the world. They make business process management software. They use it for all sorts of things, everything in financial services, to supply chain, to healthcare field. And the canonical example that they give of how they use Chainpoint is that the people use their software for auto loans. So banks need to be able to collect data from people, be able to prove when the information was collected, when it was reviewed by a loan officer, when it was approved, all the documents that go along with it. So Chainpoint is used to create an audit trail from start to finish through that entire loan process. Xero is an accounting company. They make software that's very much like QuickBooks. Up until our company got too big to run off of smaller business accounting software, it was my favorite accounting software package. So I was really thrilled when I found out that they had done an integration with Chainpoint. They had used it to be able to verify the integrity and timestamp of transactional data that was entered into their system. And Everything is an IoT data company that did an integration with Chainpoint to be able to prove the integrity and timestamp of data that's being collected from various IoT devices. And this is just a small sample of the amount of companies that we actually see using Chainpoint. It just seems like every single day, maybe every other day now, we learn about a new company. Recently learned about a company called TruePick. They create software that allows you to capture photos for things like insurance claims or journalism. They're doing this with millions and millions of photos, and they're using Chainpoint to be able to create a timestamp proof of every single photo that goes through their system, which uses the Bitcoin blockchain as the root of trust for that information. There's another company called SignRequest. SignRequest is very much like a DocuSign type company. They and other digital document signing companies are using Chainpoint to be able to timestamp every single document that gets signed through their system. So all of the documents in all of the workflows. And these are not things that are being done at a prototype level. These are things that are being done in production and things that are used by millions of different customers. So, let's talk about some of the common use cases. It kind of gets, related to what I was just talking about, an audit trail for a business process. That's something that's very common that we see. So if you're in a company that has a certain business process and you're regulated, you need to be able to prove that something happened. Consent forms, an audit trail for supply chain when people are inspecting things, aircraft inspection. We've seen somebody integrate our technology into an aircraft inspection mobile app. Those are the type of things that people are using Chainpoint for. Document timestamping, I already mentioned, the SignRequest use case. There are 3 other digital signature companies that are using Chainpoint right now. It's all open source software, by the way, so we don't know when people, there's nothing, people aren't signing up for anything, we're not getting insight, we're only finding out about these things by seeing them in the wild. Data integrity, that's actually a pretty interesting use case in the healthcare field. Back when we first started Tyrion in 2015, when we launched, our first big customer was Philips. And I didn't know it at the time, but Philips' largest business is, individual business is healthcare. They have a huge division. They do things like they make MRI machines and all sorts of industrial medical equipment. And after winning that hackathon and seeing the signups and for the original Tyrion application shoot through the roof, I got an email from a guy that said, hi, my name's Bart. I'm from Philips. I'm using Tyrion before it was Chainpoint, but I'm using Tyrion to be able to collect data from MRI machines to prove the integrity of the data stream that's coming in, and I've got a few questions. Like, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, yes, this is actually working. And that kicked off a relationship with them that lasted, a considerable amount of time. We did a bunch of different prototypes with collecting data from industrial medical equipment, for audit trails for things like the process for tracking a flu vaccination program. We did that, and they published a case study about it. And then more recently, we've learned that several large drug manufacturers, I wish I could say the name, but I can't, but they are using us for collecting data for clinical trials. So being able to collect the data and prove the audit trail of when the data was collected, that the information hasn't been tampered with. And this is important for them, and it always has been important to them for regulatory purposes. But I think it's becoming increasingly important because if you look at a company like Theranos, so Theranos was a company that promised that with 1 drop of blood, they would be able to run a whole variety of blood tests instead of having to take several vials of blood. And they got in trouble for a lot of things. But one of the things that they got in trouble for was basically that they faked test results, and they didn't have the proper data to be able to back all the claims that they were making to the FDA and other regulators. So this has raised awareness amongst people in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry that this is an important use case. And lastly, regulatory compliance. So there's a company called TokenSoft. They are a ICO and security token issuance platform, regulatory compliant, based in San Francisco. James Poole, their CTO, is here speaking somewhere today. They need to be able, what they're doing is they're collecting information from accredited investors, running those accredited investors through a KYC process to be able to prove who they are, verifying their accreditation, accredited investor status, and then creating an audit trail for all the information and all the processes that happen as they go through this token sale or security token issuance process. Chainpoint has been integrated with TokenSoft so that they're creating a verifiable, provable audit trail of all of that information and all those processes. And you can imagine in something like an ICO or security token issuance, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty at this time. And being able to have third-party verifiable proof that this information was collected at this time in this particular order is very valuable. And that's true for lots of different industries, not just things where there is regulatory uncertainty, like the example that I just mentioned. Also, there's a company called Token, Tokken, that did integration with us. They make software for the cannabis industry. So they need to be able to prove things like cash transactions, inventory management, those types of things. And they did integration with our software. So there's things on the regulatory uncertainty side, but also if you're just working at a financial services firm and you want to be able to prove that you're collecting information about compliance programs, compliance training, those types of things, our software is a very good fit. So I'm going to go back into software developer mode and try to tell you guys a little bit about what a Chainpoint proof is. So if you look over here, you can see a Chainpoint proof is like a recipe, going from a hash of some data, which could be a database record, it could be a document, and you play through all of these operations to get to the hash that is the Merkle hash that is the Merkle root that is in a Bitcoin block header. So you can see up here at the top, we have a hash of some data. You send that hash into one of the nodes on the network. So right now there are about 5,800 nodes. You can use a discovery service to be able to discover any of those nodes. There's a JS client. There's a bunch of ways to interact with this network. Some people run private nodes for their business if they have certain scalability or privacy things. But you send a hash into the system. You get back a hash ID. And that is a V1 UUID that has an embedded NTP timestamp. So you get a trusted timestamp that gives you a high precision timestamp, but it's fully trusted from the node that you're getting information back from. Next, we have, you can see that, I won't go into since there's so few software developers, I won't go into how this is created, but you can see here there's a NIST randomness beacon. So NIST publishes a random number with a timestamp in it once every minute. So we're actually mixing that data into these proofs, or the nodes of the network are mixing that data into this proof. So that gives you a time precision of between the NTP time and the NIST beacon of when this proof was actually created, or at least started. It takes about an hour to fully generate the proof. There's a set of operations, and about every hour we publish a Bitcoin transaction, and that transaction, we watch that transaction. We wait for it to get 6 confirmations. That way we know that there's no orphan blocks or anything like that. And we create a Merkle inclusion proof that kind of goes conceptually from that top all the way to bottom where you see the Bitcoin anchor. And if anybody has questions about this, how it works technically, please come talk to me afterwards. I'll be happy to explain it to you. So something that happened yesterday that has been a long time coming is Microsoft integrated Chainpoint natively with their Logic apps and Microsoft Flow platform. So this is what it looks like over here on the left-hand side. It is a tool inside Azure that you can either use through Microsoft Flow, or you can use through their Logic apps platform, which you can actually run yourself on your own cloud applications. But you can build visual workflows. They have connectors for hundreds of software applications, Salesforce, Oracle, MailChimp, you name it, it's in there. And the advantage here is now that you can build these workflows and you can actually include the creation of a Chainpoint proof inside those workflow processes. So we've been working with Microsoft for this for a very long time, and we're excited about it. They had about a 7-day delay on getting it live, but so it happened over the weekend. We're going to wait till Monday to make some more news about this. And for any of you who might be following on what we're doing, so we're working on a project internally called Hydra, named for the mythical beast, where you cut off one head and it grows 2 more. We're trying to make our network and the technology as resilient as possible. So we're working on a new version of Chainpoint Core, which is the software that runs sort of at the center of the network, a new version of Chainpoint Node, and a new smart contract registry. And again, just giving a little preview of this right now, not going to make any announcements until sometime later this quarter. And we're hiring, so if you're a smart contract developer, if you're a software developer, we definitely are looking for great people to join our team. And if you want to learn more about what we do, you can contact me on Twitter at Wayne Vaughan, visit Tyrion.com, or just check out chainpoint.org. So, thanks. Got time for questions?
Where are you what are you seeing as some good places to put the data that you're, for public data, what are you seeing as good repositories to store data that are hashing?
Okay, that's a good question. So to be clear, when you submit something into the Chainpoint network, you're not actually publishing your data out there. You're publishing a hash, and then you have to wait about 60 to 90 minutes, and you get back a Chainpoint proof. And then you store that proof locally. So you're not actually putting public information out there. There is only the aggregation of all the hashes that have come into the system during that particular epoch is committed to a Bitcoin transaction. So there's no risk of any information inside your systems being able to get leaked out into the world. Now, let's say you've got a document, make it really simple, and you have a Chainpoint proof for that document. You can send that document along with that proof to anybody anywhere in the world, and they can independently verify the integrity and timestamp of that information. If you digitally sign that document with a key that is tied to your identity that is in some sort of public registry, like a key-based record, that's another way that you can tie that back to you as an individual or an organization. And then additionally, there are some people who've started storing the documents and the proofs in an IPFS cluster. So they will pin it into IPFS. IPFS works in a way where you can actually it's kind of like a caching network. You know, as the information moves around the network, it holds onto it, but it only holds onto it by default temporarily. You have to do what's called pin something to make sure that it stays there for a long period of time. But those are some. So to answer your question, that's some of how people are using this to be able to publish information.
URI, whether including an IPFS URI was that a pretty common thing that people were doing?
That is a common thing that people are doing. We acquired Proof.com and some other proof-related assets early last year, and we're working on some projects around Proof, and have some plans for using IPFS in that.
With respects to the insurance, sorry, with respects to the insurance sector, like I know there's definite advantages for like big data and making sure that you're able to analyze everything. How easy or difficult is the adoption of Chainpoint or any of your technology?
Technologically, it's really easy. Politically, it's really hard. So I know a little something about the insurance landscape. I lived in Hartford, Connecticut for 20 years, which is the insurance capital of the world. Did a lot of work with insurance companies. My mother was a head of product development for a company called Ivan's Insurance Value-Added Network Services back in the 80s and early 90s, which was an industry-owned organization that bought time on IBM's Advantis network to be able to resell back to all of its members for transaction processing. This was before the internet, and she was in charge of developing all the products on top of that, so things like the Accord standards and everything else she was involved with. So that's what was on my dining room table when I was like 12, But I've talked to a lot of companies because I started Tyrion when we were in Connecticut. I talked to Aetna, I talked to Travelers, I talked to Hartford Steam Boiler, I talked to the Hartford, like all these companies. And their core systems, it's not easy to get something built into these core systems for things like claims processing. But the systems around the edge, it is easier. So for example, if an insurance company has a mobile application and they're saying like, okay, you're reporting that you were in an automobile accident, being able to timestamp and verify your GPS coordinates, the picture that you're taking of the car accident and the scene is something that is useful. There's a company called Flip to Lease. They are, if you need to flip your lease, if you're in a lease and you want to get out of it, they're a company that's using our technology, and I believe they're using it partly in the inspections process of being able to prove that you are leaving the state of this lease that you're trying to flip to somebody else in a particular format. There's things like consent forms that are important for insurance purposes in healthcare. So those applications that are closer to the edge and not part of the core claims processing and financial aspect of the insurance industry, that's where we're seeing the traction. And if you think about it, that makes sense. The same is also true for healthcare. My wife, she was a neurotrauma ICU nurse at Hartford Hospital. And just before we had left Connecticut to move to California, they had started implementing Epic, a new system. The rollout period for Epic was a 36-month time frame. That was the time frame for them to start rolling it out, tool would be completely adopted by all the staff at the Hartford Hospital, which is actually a network of area hospitals. Nothing is going to derail that freight train. Doesn't matter how good the technology is. But there might be cases where they could use it for things like the applications they're using for like reporting on patients or something like that. So I think that one of the mistakes that people made with the blockchain, not Bitcoin movement, and with the blockchain, all the things movement, why I start off with blockchain Jesus, is they thought that they were going to build better consensus-based systems to replace a lot of these core systems inside companies. And for the most part, that hasn't happened. So I'm getting the red flag from back here. So I think our time is up. Thank you very much.